man would not leave. That was the thing nobody understood. When someone died, you left. Every animal on Earth understood this. A body draws predators, and predators kill the living. You grieve for exactly as long as it takes to understand. Thing lying on the ground is no longer the person you knew. Then you move. Every Neanderthal who had ever lived understood this. Except Rook. This morning. Right now. His brother Nan had stopped breathing before the sun came up. The group had gathered, the way they always gathered. Something changed. Pressing close, reading the situation, preparing to respond. Several of them were already moving toward the cave entrance, already thinking about the day's hunt, already processing the loss the way survival required. Quickly, and then not at all. Rook sat down beside his brother's body and did not move. The group watched him. Nobody had a word for what he was doing. Nobody had seen it before. The oldest woman in the group, who had seen more deaths than anyone, stood. Cave entrance for a long time, looking back at Rook sitting motionless. Cave floor beside a body that was already beginning to cool. She had never seen this either. 60,000 years ago. In a cave in what is now northern Iraq, something happened that separated humans from every other species that has ever existed on this planet. It started with one man who refused to walk away. The cave had been their home for 3 generations. It sat in the Zagros Mountains, a wide limestone opening in the cliff face, deep enough to sleep in safely, high enough above the valley floor to see. Predators approaching. The Shanidar River ran below. In winter, the cave held warmth. In summer, its shadow gave relief from the heat. 12 people lived here, not by choice. Not exactly. 12 was the number that worked. Enough bodies to defend against predators, small enough. Surrounding land could feed them without being stripped bare. Groups that grew too large starved. Groups that shrank too small were vulnerable. 12 was the number that survived. They had a hierarchy, the way all groups had a hierarchy, not decided by vote, not by discussion, but by the accumulated weight of who had proven most useful, most reliable, most dangerous. When threatened, the strongest hunter led the hunts. The woman who knew the plants made decisions about food. The elder advised on weather and season. She had lived through more of both than anyone else. And then there was Nan. Nan occupied a category the group had no name for. They had no language precise enough for categories. He was not the strongest, not the most useful, not in any conventional sense. His right arm had been withered since birth, a condition that had never healed, and never would. His eyes had been failing for years, narrowing his useful vision to a few meters. By any calculation of survival, Nan should have been left behind years ago. He had not been left behind. Every day, without discussion, without instruction, someone handed Nan food before he had to ask. Someone positioned him near the fire at night. Someone walked beside him when the group moved across uneven ground. Nobody decided to do this. They simply did it, and Nan, in return, gave them something that had no name either, knowledge so. Deep it had become instinct. Which cave systems connected underground, where water could be found when the river ran low. Which sounds in the dark meant danger, and which meant nothing. 40 years of accumulated observation, carried in a body that could no longer hunt, but could still remember everything it had ever seen. This morning, that body had stopped breathing, and Rook had walked beside his brother. Across more ground than either could count, he sat down. Cave floor and stayed there. Nan had been dying for weeks. The group knew this the way they knew most things, not through words. through observation. The way he moved had changed. The way he breathed had changed. He ate less. He slept more. He stopped responding to sounds that once would have snapped him alert. Brooke had watched all of this. Here is something the fossil record tells us about Neanderthals that most people do not know. They were not the brutal, dim-witted creatures that early anthropology imagined. Their brains were larger than ours. Their social structures were complex. The evidence at Shanidar alone shows a group that was doing something that no purely survival-driven species does. They were taking care of people who could not take care of themselves. The individual archaeologists call Shanidar I, the man whose remains were found. Withered arm and healed injuries, had survived multiple severe traumas. A crushing blow to the skull that would have caused permanent vision loss on one side. Multiple healed rib fractures. The withered arm amputated or atrophied at or before birth. This man had lived, by the best estimate, to somewhere between 35 and 45 years old. In a Neanderthal group in the Zagros Mountains 60,000 years ago, that was extraordinary. He had not survived alone. Someone had fed him when he could not hunt. Someone had positioned him safely when the group was under threat. Someone had chosen to spend energy on a person. Over years and decades, a person who could not fully repay it. Currency of survival. That someone in the last weeks had been Rook. Every morning, Rook had brought his brother food before taking his own. Every night he had made sure Nan was close enough to the fire. He had not been asked to do this. He had not been thanked in any language either of them possessed. He had simply done it, the way breathing is done, without deciding to, until this morning when Nan stopped. The body lay on the cave floor in the early light. Rook sat beside it. The rest of the group maintained a distance, not from fear, exactly, but specific uncertainty of encountering something none of them had a framework for. They had seen death. They understood death. A body that was alive became a body that was not. The group adjusted and moved forward. But Rook was not adjusting. Rook was not moving forward. He sat with one hand resting on his brother's chest, and he stayed there. The oldest woman in the group who had been watching. Cave entrance, walked back inside. She crouched a few meters from Rook and studied him the way she studied. Everything she did not understand. Carefully, without rushing to a conclusion, what she was watching was grief. Not the brief, functional grief of an animal that registers loss and moves on. Something longer, something that did not resolve. Something that sat with the loss and refused to let it become simply the past. Scientists who study Neanderthal cognition argue about what they were capable of, whether they had language, whether they had ritual, whether they had any concept of what death meant beyond its immediate physical reality. The evidence at Shanidar does not answer these questions cleanly, but it shows us this. At least one Neanderthal sat beside a body, 60,000 years ago, long enough. Group around him had to make a decision about what to do next. And the decision they made changed everything. By midday, the group was restless. The practical problem was real. A body draws flies, draws smell, draws the attention of animals. Group did not want near their shelter. Every instinct, every accumulated experience, every lesson survival had taught them said the same thing: move the body out or move the group away from it. Two of the younger hunters had already gone out to scout, not for food, to identify alternate sleeping sites, preparing for the possibility. Cave would need to be abandoned temporarily. Ruck did not move. The oldest woman sat nearby and watched him. She had been thinking since morning, in the way she thought about everything, slowly, thoroughly, turning the problem from every angle. She had lived through more deaths than anyone in the group. She had watched the process each time. Initial shock, the brief disruption, the return to routine. She had done it herself, more times than she wanted to remember. This was different. What Rook was doing had no name, but she recognized it, not from watching others, from something inside herself. Had never acted on. That survival had never given her permission to act on. The thing that had wanted, each time, to stay. The thing she had always overridden because staying served nothing. Living needed the living to keep moving. She looked at Rook. She looked at Nan's body. She picked up a piece of flat stone, cave floor, and held it in her hands for a moment. Then she began to dig. Rook watched her for a long time before he understood what she was doing. The ground inside the cave was compacted earth and soft limestone. Difficult, but not impossible. She worked slowly, using the flat stone as a scraper, and her hands too. Pull the loosened material away. It was hard work. Her hands bled from the edges of the stone. She did not stop. After a while, Rook picked up another stone and began to dig beside her. Here is what makes this moment extraordinary. There was no model for it. No one had done this before. There was no tradition being followed, no instruction being obeyed, no concept of what the result should look like or what purpose it would serve. They were inventing something in real time, driven by nothing more sophisticated than the feeling that this was the right thing to do. That feeling, that there was a right thing to do with the dead, that the dead deserved something. That feeling is one most significant cognitive developments in the history of our species. Other animals register loss. Elephants return to the bones of their dead. Chimpanzees have been observed carrying deceased infants for days. Grief in some form is not unique to humans. But deliberate burial, the decision to prepare a specific place, to put the body, earth intentionally, to mark the transition between living and dead with an act that costs the living time and energy and serves no survival purpose, that is something else entirely. That is what Rook and the old woman were building on the floor of a cave, Zagros Mountains, with bleeding hands and no word for what they were doing. By late afternoon, the hole was deep enough. The woman left the cave as the light began to fail. She walked down the slope below the cave entrance into the area where the mountain plants grew dense along the water's edge. She moved slowly, deliberately, the way she moved when she was looking for something specific. She came back carrying flowers, yarrow, white clusters, medicinal, familiar, groundsel, ephedra, whose stems the group used sometimes for its stimulant properties, grape hyacinth, small and blue, woody horsetail. She carried them back into the cave and set them down beside the hole they had dug. The group watched her. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved to stop her. Nobody asked what she was doing, because they already understood. Not the conscious thought, but the feeling underneath it. The feeling underneath it, the thing that made sense without words. You give something to the dead. Why? There is no survival reason. Flowers do not preserve a body. Flowers do not protect the living. Flowers cost time and energy that a group living, edge of subsistence, cannot easily spare. And yet, the impulse is so deep, so consistent across human cultures, separated by tens of thousands of years and thousands of kilometers. Only reasonable explanation is that it predates all of them, that it comes from somewhere older than any culture, that it comes from a night in a cave in Iraq 60,000 years ago. when a woman walked down a mountain slope in the failing light and came back with her arms full of flowers for a man who would never smell them. They laid Nan in the ground as the last light left the cave entrance. Rook placed his brother himself, carefully, the way you carry something fragile, positioned him on his side, knees slightly bent, the posture of sleep. The old woman arranged the flowers around and over him. Others who had been watching from a distance came closer now, moving without being. Called, filling the space around the grave. Nobody had organized this. Nobody had planned it. They stood in silence, around a hole in the ground, a hole that contained a man they had fed, moved with, slept beside for years. Something happened in that silence that had never happened before. They were all thinking about the same thing at the same time. Not about food, not shelter, not the next day's hunt. Not about the practical reorganization that a death requires. They were thinking about Nan, specific memories, specific moments, specific weight of a specific person who was no longer in the world. This is what burial does. This is what it has always done. In every culture that has ever practiced it, it forces the living to stop, to look directly at the loss, to hold it still long enough for the mind to begin to understand what it means. Before this night, the Neanderthal group had moved through deaths the way water moves, around stones, finding the path of least resistance, closing over the gap, continuing forward, efficient, necessary, survivable. After this night, something had changed in how they moved through the world. They knew now that the people around them would be lost, that Rook would be lost eventually, that the old woman would be lost, that each of them was carrying their memories, their knowledge, their specific way of moving through a cave. Dark was temporary, and that this temporariness mattered. Rook was different after that night, not visibly. Not in any way that would have been obvious to someone watching from outside. He still hunted. He still carried his share. He still watched the valley from the cave entrance, evenings the way he always had. But he watched the others differently now. The young hunters who went out each morning, he watched them leave. And he knew, in a way he had not known before, that each departure was not guaranteed to end in a return. The old woman was tending the fire. He looked at her. He saw her clearly. For the first time, was old, that her time was finite, that there would be a morning when she did not wake up. He had known these things before, abstract way that all animals know danger is possible. Now he knew them personally, specifically, in the way that changes how you move through a day. This is what anthropologists call the awareness of mortality. Knowledge, unique to humans among all species, that you yourself will die, that the people you love will die, that the world will continue without them, the way it continued without Nan, that this fact does not become easier to hold simply because it is true. The Neanderthal brain was large enough to carry this knowledge. The burial at Shanidar suggests that at least some of them did carry it, that they had crossed the threshold from registering death as an event to understanding. Death as a condition of existence.
Shanidar
That
Cave,
understanding is,
in the
depending on how you
Zagros
look at
Mountains,
it, either the heaviest
preserved in
burden
stone.
our species has ever carried,
Prehistory.
or the thing that made us capable
Here,
of everything that
echoes
came
of
after.
our origins
Perhaps both.
remain.
Ralph Solecki excavated Shanidar Cave between 1951 and 1960. He found 10 Neanderthal individuals in the sediment. Several showed evidence of deliberate burial, bodies positioned with intention, associated with materials that suggested ceremony. The flower pollen that sparked the most debate, whether it was placed deliberately or blown in by wind or carried by burrowing rodents, has never been fully resolved.
The
But
withered
the
right
bones
arm,
tell their own
a
story.
clear sign of
Shanidar
survival
Cave,
through community
the individual
support.
with the withered arm and healed injuries,
This physical
lived
evidence
for decades
illuminates their
in
social
a condition
bonds
that
and
required
care.
the support of others to survive. Shanidar
Shanidar Cave.
was buried in a position that
Multiple
suggested
lives.
careful placement.
Reverse
Multiple
mouth,
individuals showed trauma that had
Revenge
healed,
scary,
meaning
but
they
this
had
was
been
the
kept
love
alive
was
through
patiently uncovered.
injury by a group that chose to expend resources on their survival. These are not the behaviors of creatures driven purely by survival calculation. These are behaviors beyond survival, said to what they contributed. That loss was
60,000
worth
years
mourning.
ago, this pollen was
Dead
placed
deserve
in a
to be placed in
Neanderthal
the
grave.
earth with care and with flowers.
The most
and
debated
presence of
artifact
the living
in
standing quietly
paleoanthropology.
around them.
The debate
Tonight,
endures.
somewhere in the world, someone is standing beside a grave. They are holding flowers that will die. They are saying words that the person underground cannot hear. They are doing something that serves no survival purpose and costs them time and grief, and the specific pain of standing still inside a loss. They are doing exactly what Rook did. 60,000 years later, the flowers have not changed. The grief has not changed. The impulse to mark the passage of someone who mattered, to say, with your body and your presence, and the flowers in your hands, that this person was here and is now gone, and that this fact is not nothing. That has not changed either. Sleep well.